Hello folks, welcome to Canal Channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how to replace the fuel pump or sending unit of a 2007 to 2011 Toyota Camry. This applies for a 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder. The part might change, but it's the same procedure. And with that said, let's jump right into it. So for us to get to the fuel pump, what we have to do is we have to remove this seat. So we have to pull it from here and here, and then once we pop it from the securing point, we pull it forward, so that way we can expose the plate where the fuel pump is. So to make the replacement of the fuel pump, the access to it is going to be right underneath the back seat. You're going to have to remove this, pop it out so it pops, and then it pulls towards the front so the seat comes out, and then you expose this cover plate. So this is kind of loose already, but there's some glue around it. You're going to have to put a flathead screwdriver, pop it, unglue it in some sort of a tar, and then once you do that, this is the access panel to get to the fuel pump. So now that you have done that, we have to disconnect the electrical and the fuel line, and we're going to show you how we do that so we can start removing the 8mm bolts and pull out the fuel pump. So what you can do is you can push this grommet through and then push this through the cable all the way over here, so it just kind of sticks to the side, so you can start you don't have it hanging like this. So now to disconnect the electrical, what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to push this little tab back here in, and then you're gonna have to pull all this structure straight up. You can put a flathead screwdriver right underneath here and help it. Just go slow so you don't break it. So now that we disconnected the electrical, now we have to disconnect the fuel line right there. And here's the electrical connector. So now to do that, there's a trick to it. To disconnect the fuel line, we have to slide this locking device outwards. This yellow tab, it might be full of dust, so you gotta clean around and vacuum really good before you do this, so that way when you remove this, nothing falls into the fuel tank. So we slide it outwards, and then we can pop this fuel line. There's only one line to this. Now all we did was just pull it straight out, and then once we hit, we push it in a little bit so it will bring itself in and let it slide completely out. So now we can put it to the side. We're gonna need this to put everything back together, so don't break this little locking device. So now we have to do is pop this line out of there, and there's gonna be a little bit of pressure and a little bit of fuel spilling around here. Now that we have popped this fuel line out of there, we put it to the side. If you want, you can wrap some tape around it so nothing goes in there, no debris. And now we can remove the 8mm bolts or screws that hold that plate, and it pushes the fuel pump towards the fuel tank. So we remove them all. So for this task, we're using a little extension, a ratchet, and a 8mm socket, so we can loosen them and take all the 8mm bolts out so we can get the plate out. In your case, it might be some tar on top of the bolt, so you just gotta find them and clean them around so you can put the socket over them and loosen them. So now we're getting to the last bolt, and once you start unscrewing it and coming off, the whole structure is gonna start lifting off, and that's normal because there's some spring that pushes and keeps the fuel pump towards the bottom when the cap is on, so that way it absorbs the fuel from the bottom. So once that happens, it's gonna be normal. And before you pull this out, you want to vacuum and clean this off before, because all the debris that is around can go into the tank. That's why we say the vacuum and clean around this. So now this plate on top of the fuel pump, it has two little guides and it's gonna come off. So you pull this off and then the fuel pump stays there. It has two little dots here that it guides, so it leaves the opening on top of the fuel connection and the electronics. So now when you're pulling the fuel pump straight up, there might be a little something that is going to hit first, and it's going to be this corrugated hose. So all you do with just kind of push it inwards and pull the fuel pump straight up and make that hose come up, and then you're going to have other equipment that has to come out. So now you got to set the float and the strainer, you have to tilt it backwards and you bring it out, and that's a fuel pump, the strainer, the float sending unit for the level, and the fuel pump in there. So now the tension that we were getting when we were pushing the cap off is from this spring right here. This is what, when you put the cap on, it pushes tension, so then the fuel pump, it's not bouncing around and all that kind of stuff. So that's the purpose of the spring. It keeps tension, so once we bolted it on the outside, it pushes everything down, so it keeps it to the lowest part of the tank, so the fuel is absorbed. And this is the seal or the gasket that seals around once everything's on. So now we're gonna, supposedly this is the new fuel pump, everything on it, and then what you do is you, before you start putting it on, we're gonna show you the internal of the fuel tank, and you want to make sure that there was nothing to fill in there, and that's why we tell you to clean around this, because you're gonna have a big opening, and when you're putting the fuel pump in there, you're probably gonna make that debris fall in there, so you don't want to make do that. So now we grab our fuel pump, you compare it to what you got, looks the same. So now to put it on, you're gonna have the strainer and the float go in an angle first, and then you tilt it straight, and then once you push it, try to push it in, maybe this little hose, corrugated hose, you're gonna have to push it in with a finger or your other hand to make it go straight in. So now all we do is that we have the tension of the spring because the fuel pump is touching the bottom already. So what you do is that the electrical side has to be pointing to the passenger side, and this line for the fuel line, it has to be straight up back, so like this. So now we put the cap or the plate that pushes all that down, and then we line it up. You see that, that one and that one, and then that big opening is for the electrical and the fuel line, so that way when we push it down, then we want to line it up with the holes, and we start putting in our bolts, so we can start tightening everything back together. So what I have done is I have the plate bolted down or just secured down with 1, 2 bolts offset, so that way it keeps it down. And now that I know that the plate is there, it's not going to be popping up from one end, that way it keeps it uniform down. I put the other bolts and tighten it down. There's 8 of these bolts. There's Phillips or 8mm socket, and they're pretty small. They're not that big. These are the ones in charge of securing the plate and holding the fuel pump towards the tank. There's 8 of them. That we have can tighten in all the 8 bolts. We can start tightening them with our tools. So now that we have tightened them the 8mm bolts down and everything is tight, we can start putting our fuel line back in, so we can start then plugging in our electrical side. So to plug your fuel line back in, all you have to do is just put it over it straight and push it down until it stops. And now we can put the securing point or the locking device. So this lock or this securing point can only go like this. This high point has to be up. It cannot be upside down like this. So now we put it and slide it in so until it locks. As you saw, we just got it in there. We guide it. So now all we have to do is push it from this end, so it goes all the way across and it locks itself, so then the fuel line cannot come off. So now that we have connected our fuel side, we can connect the electrical side, and all we have to do is match two with a two and three prongs or three connectors with a three. So it goes like this. So the cables will be facing towards the trunk. So we set them and push it in until it locks. So at this point, before you start putting the cover and everything together, the seat, you want to make sure that everything, once the fuel line is there, the electrical is there, connected, all the bolts are tied down and everything looks good. Before you put the cover back on, you want to turn on your car or start your car, and you want to make sure that there's no issues with this system once you put it together. Because if you put everything together and you put the seat and there's a problem, then you're going to have to take everything apart to see what's going on here. So before you do that, you move on to turn on your car. Everything looks good. Then we put the plate back on, the rubber through it, and then we can put our seat back together. So now that we have replaced the fuel pump, which was right here, now we can put the seat back on, and then we can slide it into, guide it into the back, and then make sure it pops into this hole. And this hole, that's where the rivets go for the holding point, and the seat belt go into these grooves. So we put it back in. And there it is. We have finished the replacement of the fuel pump or sending unit on this car. Well, folks, hopefully this video was useful and help on how to replace a fuel pump or sending unit of a 2007 to 2011 Toyota Camry, 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder. The part might change a little bit, but it's the same procedure. So the most important part about this is cleaning around where you're gonna pull the fuel pump or sending unit out, so that way nothing falls into the tank when you expose the internals. And then make sure that you put all those little bolts or screws into a magnetic tray, so that way you don't lose them everywhere. So with that said, folks, for friends who are watching our video, haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like the video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here en el canal del Chano José.